Alien Huntress and human engineer struggle to survive on a hostile world. Long had the Eclipse plied the wide, star-dusted highways of the galaxy. Though no shining masterpiece of modern shipbuilding, it yet retained a certain regal aspect, a hint of the old frontier spirit that spoke of reliability and determination. The humming of its robust engine echoed through its cramped halls, and at its helm stood Ethan Carlyle, a human of unassuming bearing but singular talent as an engineer. He was no soldier, no grand adventurer in the mold of his more flamboyant peers, yet an air of quiet resolve had always guided him. Standing by his side was Lyra of Veridia, a being possessed of emerald skin and eyes that shimmered like sun-kissed jade. She was of a proud and ancient lineage, her tribe known far and wide in the outer systems for their skill in the hunt. She carried herself with a deft poise, a curvature in her spine that readied her at any moment for sudden action. Lithe yet strong, she embodied the tireless spirit of her homeworld. Their destinies had intertwined for some months now, ever since the day Lyra had saved Ethan from a monstrous predator on a forsaken asteroid mine. He had been part of a small crew hired to repair drifting cargo craft, but the only reason he still drew breath was her keen arrow and unerring aim. Friendship had followed gratitude, and from that bond arose a partnership forged in survival. On this particular voyage, the pair had undertaken a seemingly simple mission: ferry a shipment of environmental regulators to a distant frontier colony. However, it was not the path but the unforeseen that would deliver them into the crucible of terror and hope. Indeed, the Eclipse was set upon a lonely route, with no sign of danger from the star charts. Only the faint glimmer of a swirling nebula to starboard disturbed the otherwise endless void. Ethan, ever cautious, spent many hours in the engine room, listening to the thrum of machinery, feeling for any tremors beyond the ordinary. Lyra, as she always did, busied herself with vigilant patrols of the cargo hold and the corridors, poised to detect any threat that might come upon them unannounced. Life in the emptiness was rarely comfortable, but they had grown used to it, forging a friendship built on mutual respect and necessity. "You worry too much," Lyra teased one morning in her fluent but curiously accented standard, leaning against the polished metal of the engine room's bulkhead. She observed Ethan fiddling with wires beneath the console. "This old starsteed's bones are older than either of us, but she hasn't failed yet." Ethan, hair tousled and eyes ringed with exhaustion, let out a dry chuckle. "Better to be safe than stranded. And this vessel is older than it looks. One fuse out of place, and we might be floating corpses in the vacuum." Lyra's eyes narrowed with gentle amusement. "Your caution is admirable. It's what keeps you alive. But come, you've hardly eaten, and your nerves need respite." He nodded, carefully sealing a maintenance panel. In a moment, in truth, the Eclipse had begun emitting subtle hints of trouble: random power fluctuations, slight changes in temperature regulation, a peculiar hum in the engine's pulse. Ethan sensed something was off. He had triple-checked the main reactors, replaced coil assemblies, tested every vital system thrice. Still, no definitive cause for the anomalies emerged. A silent tension seemed to gather in the air, like the portent of a distant storm. Unbeknownst to them, far beyond the fragile hull of the Eclipse, swirling cosmic energies of a hidden anomaly pressed closer. Invisible distortions rippled through space, interfering with navigational sensors. The starship's autopilot, unsuspecting, carried them inexorably closer to that anomaly's heart. Had they but known, they might have set a different course, but fate seldom reveals its design so early. And so, Ethan kept vigil in the engine room. Lyra paced the corridors, and the faint disturbances in the ship's instruments were dismissed as quirks. All was quiet for that one final day, until the swirling colors of starlight beyond the portholes took on a strange, disconcerting sheen. It happened in an instant. The sedate hum of the Eclipse's engine escalated into a shrill screech. A wave of jolting vibrations swept through every deck. Consoles blinked and spat sparks. Dread hammered in Ethan's chest as he rushed to the cockpit, calling for Lyra. Alarm klaxons wailed, painting the corridors with ominous red flashes. Overhead, the lights flickered in frantic patterns. Lyra met Ethan at the cockpit door, her emerald face set in grim lines. "What's happening?" she demanded, voice tense. Before he could answer, an automated voice boomed through the speakers. Warning, catastrophic system failure. Uncharted gravitational well detected. Scrambling to the pilot's seat, Ethan wrestled with the controls. The thrusters refused to respond as intended, sending the ship lurching from side to side. With a sickening sense of inevitability, the Eclipse buckled under the force of an invisible pull, like a kite caught in a hurricane. Beyond the thick windshield, a planet loomed into view, half obscured by swirling purple clouds and violent storms. The red emergency lights blinked in unison with the planet's swirling horizon, forging a surreal dance of color and panic. "We have to brace for impact," Ethan yelled, flipping every override switch he could reach. Desperate, he tried to reroute power to the forward thrusters. He felt the strain in every circuit, the hiss of sizzling cables behind the cockpit walls. Lyra activated the stabilizers manually, contorting her lithe figure to reach awkwardly placed levers meant for 2 or more crew. Sweat glistened on her brow. The planet's gravitational well yanked the Eclipse unmercifully downward, tearing away what little control they had. Within seconds, the ship hit the upper atmosphere. Fiery streaks of friction framed their descent. Shock after shock battered them, the hull groaning, rivets straining. Ethan caught a glimpse of the planet's surface, a mass of swirling greens and browns, a vast jungle world marred by deep canyons and colossal mountains. Then, with thunderous impact, they smashed into the canopy. The hull screeched as branches and vines tore at the ship's belly, the entire structure rattling until it seemed it would shatter. When at last the descent came to a bone-jarring halt, the Eclipse lay on the edge of a clearing, half buried in a tangle of vegetation, smoke pouring from a ruptured engine block. For a moment, silence. Only the crackle of fires in the underbrush, the sizzle of scorched metal. Ethan pulled himself upright, head pounding, body aching. Lyra groaned beside him, a gash on her forearm seeping dark blue blood. "You hurt," he managed, voice ragged. "Only a scratch," she replied, teeth clenched. "We're down, but I'd hardly call this a landing." Alarmed by the acrid smell of smoke, Ethan struggled to his feet. The cockpit was nearly unrecognizable, shards of broken screens, twisted panels. A surge of gratitude swept over him that they were both still alive. He forced open the cockpit door. Black fumes and flickering flames danced along the corridor. If they lingered, the entire ship might be consumed. Quick thinking drove him forward. He snatched up a fire-suppressant canister, dousing as many hotspots as he could reach. Lyra, ignoring her injury, joined in. Together, they fought to keep the ship from becoming their fiery tomb. When at last the flames were subdued, the pair slumped down, sweat-soaked and choking on chemical residue. Outside, a cacophony of alien calls and echoes drifted through the mangled hull. In the fleeting glimpses between twisted metal, they saw dense, towering trees and thick, creeping vines. A veritable green fortress, alive with unknown creatures. Ethan coughed. "We need to see what's left of our supplies. If the hull is compromised, we'd better salvage what we can and set up some kind of camp." Lyra nodded, her gaze already combing the wreckage for salvageable weapons and gear. "The environment here is like none I've seen. But the atmosphere is breathable, at least." "Yes, if the composition readouts were correct," said Ethan. "We can survive outside. The question is, for how long?" Lyra's eyes flashed with determination. "Long enough to find a way back to the stars." With that unspoken vow echoing between them, they set about gathering anything that might prove useful. Little did they know that the dangers of this world stretched far beyond its feral beasts and poisonous flora. Their presence had not gone unnoticed. Survival demanded swift action. With the fires controlled, Ethan and Lyra secured 2 pressurized canisters of fresh water from the wrecked galley, along with ration packets, first aid kits, and Ethan's precious engineering tools. Lyra unearthed her Veridian hunting bow, forged from the fibrous bark of her homeworld's ancient trees, and a quiver of arrows tipped with a peculiar metal that glimmered in the half-light. Though battered, the bow remained intact, a token of luck amid the devastation. Once they collected their essentials, they pried open the main exit hatch. Beyond the opening yawned a lush world that seemed to pulse with life. Gigantic ferns and twisting vines rose almost as high as the battered hull, their thick leaves shimmering with emerald sheen. Curious cries and chittering sounds emanated from the shadowy depths of the undergrowth. Now and then, a flash of color indicated some fleet-footed creature darting between the leaves. Ethan's eyes flicked over the readouts from a handheld sensor. Breathable air, moderate humidity. Temperatures, scorching, he muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. But we won't suffocate. Lyra's emerald face was alight with fascination despite the predicament. My people's world is green, but not so unruly. It's as if this jungle knows no bounds. We shall have to tread carefully. By day's end, they'd established a rudimentary camp near the Eclipse's torn hull. The battered starship offered some protection against the unknown. Ethan rewired a portable generator and rigged it to a scavenged floodlight, illuminating a wedge of the clearing. Lyra patrolled the perimeter, her predatory instincts on full display. She detected shifts of movement within the treeline, flickers of eyes peering from the gloom. Night fell swiftly, revealing a sky of brilliant stars unfamiliar to Ethan's charts. Fireflies of gargantuan size glowed in the canopy, painting drifting constellations of gold among the branches. The planet's 2 moons hung overhead, a pale duo that cast an eerie glow across the jungle floor. Around a small cooking flame, Ethan and Lyra dined on the last of the ship's ready-to-eat rations. The pungent odor of alien blossoms drifted on the breeze, mixing with the tang of burnt metal from the crash site. "Tomorrow," said Ethan quietly, "I'll try to salvage any functioning parts from the engine. If I can rig up a distress beacon, we might contact a passing ship, assuming any come this way." Lyra tilted her head, her emerald eyes reflecting the firelight. "We must also learn more about this planet. If we cannot contact help, then we must find resources to survive for many days, maybe even weeks." She traced a finger over a gash in a piece of hull plating. "In my world, a good hunter learns the lay of the land before the land claims her life." He offered a thin smile. "Then tomorrow, we explore together. For now, rest." Lyra agreed, taking first watch while Ethan slept fitfully. Night creatures crooned in the undergrowth, weaving a haunting lullaby. Sharp cries, insectoid chirps, deep bellows from the distance. Each new sound threatened to erode what little calm Ethan clung to. Yet fatigue overcame him, drawing him into uneasy dreams of mechanical failures and emerald eyes framed by monstrous shadows. So passed their first night on this forbidding world. Unbeknownst to them, above the canopy, beyond the swirl of the planet's storms, a battered starship signature flitted across the upper atmosphere. A captain of ill repute, scanning the system for unsuspecting prey, took note of a downed vessel. The name Eclipse meant nothing to him, but the possibility of salvageable technology sparked avarice. Without a whisper, he and his men set their vessel into a silent orbit, waiting for dawn to reveal the location of the crash and the unsuspecting survivors. At first light, the jungle awoke with a vigorous chorus of sounds. Calls that ranged from melodic to jarring resonated through the dense foliage. Rays of pale sunlight pierced the high canopy, scattering golden pools of brilliance across the undergrowth. Ethan stretched from his makeshift cot, wincing at bruised ribs and stiff muscles. Lyra, already alert, crouched near the treeline, her bow in hand. "I spotted a large creature earlier," she said in hushed tones, as though reluctant to disturb the hush. It moved on 4 limbs, big as a hover truck, with a mane of spines down its back. "We're not alone in these jungles." Ethan exhaled slowly. Just one more danger among many. He hefted a datapad, nodding toward the battered starship. "I'll see if I can salvage enough from the engine or comms to set up a beacon." While Ethan busied himself in the wreckage, Lyra ventured into the surrounding jungle, carefully marking her path back to the crash site. Her footsteps were near silent, a testament to her Veridian heritage. She surveyed the flora with a mixture of curiosity and caution. Some plants seethed with color, others bristled with spines. She tested leaves, sniffed their scent, trying to glean which were poisonous, which might serve as food or medicine. A rush of movement ahead caught her attention. A small, furry creature bounded across a fallen log, its eyes wide and ears attuned to any threat. Lyra drew an arrow, not out of aggression but readiness. The creature vanished into the brush. She lowered her bow with a thoughtful frown. Survival was the law here, but a needless kill served no one. When she returned to the crash site a few hours later, she found Ethan hunched over a sprawl of wires and broken instruments. He looked up with a grimace. The comm array is in terrible shape. The main transmission coil is shattered. Even if I cobble together a makeshift beacon, the range won't be more than a few hundred kilometers at best. Lyra knelt, eyeing the devices. Perhaps that is enough to reach someone on this planet, if there are settlements. Ethan shook his head, wiping sweat from his brow. Uncharted world. No official records of civilization. We might be the only ones here. A moment of silence passed, the magnitude of their plight pressing upon them. We can't rely on a rescue no one knows to attempt, Lyra said at last. Let us keep searching. Perhaps we will discover a vantage point high enough for your beacon to carry farther. They decided to venture deeper into the jungle. Ethan fashioned a short spear from a length of metal pipe and a sharpened hull fragment. Crude, but better than nothing. With flasks of water strapped to their belts and ration packs stowed, they set out, stepping into the emerald labyrinth. Every step brought new marvels and new terrors. Trees soared into the sky, their bark knotted with bizarre patterns. Vines drooped like serpents, some bearing blossoms shaped like starbursts, others exuding a sticky sap that burned where it touched their hands. Strange avian creatures soared overhead, releasing warbling cries that rang like bells. A million tiny insects crawled within the leaves, their shining carapaces forming scintillating ribbons of color. And yet, for all its unbounded beauty, the jungle seemed to watch them. Behind every trunk, from beneath every mossy log, unseen eyes observed their progress. Ethan and Lyra moved cautiously, avoiding direct confrontation with larger creatures, mindful of hidden dangers. Near midday, they came upon a clearing where colossal mushrooms rose from the ground, each cap broad enough to serve as an entire roof for a shelter. Here, the air was thick with spores that floated in shimmering motes. Lyra tested the air with a careful sniff, then motioned for Ethan to hold a rag over his mouth. Together, they passed through as swiftly as they dared, unnerved by the faint hiss the fungi emitted when disturbed. By late afternoon, they had scaled a rocky outcrop that overlooked the jungle canopy. At the crest, they gazed upon a vast sea of green. From this vantage, Ethan spied shapes in the distance. Mountains with cloud-wreathed peaks, a snaking river of muddy waters. The sky tinted orange as the local star moved westward, the jungle below cast in a haunting glow. We'll set up the beacon here, Ethan said, shoulders slumped with fatigue. Even if it can't reach beyond the atmosphere, it might still alert any spaceship passing overhead. Lyra nodded, scanning the horizon. I sense we're not alone, she said, her voice low. Local predators? He asked, pressing a button to activate the beacon's meager signal. She shook her head. I saw a movement among the treetops, a metallic glint, not a bird or beast. Something else is out there. Ethan frowned, scanning the canopy with a battered pair of binoculars. At first, he saw only swaying leaves and swirling insects. But then, a distant reflection, a flash of metal among the branches. A tremor of apprehension rippled through him. Could be wreckage from the Eclipse flung across the forest, he ventured. Yet a part of him doubted. He set no illusions on the matter. They could be dealing with other interlopers. Pirates sometimes haunted uncharted worlds, scouring crash sites for salvage or capturing survivors for ransom or forced labor. Even as the thought arose, he forced it back, focusing on immediate concerns, shelter, water, and the hope of rescue. Still, Lyra's words echoed in his mind, an omen he could not entirely dismiss. Over the next few days, they established a pattern of cautious exploration. By morning, they scavenged for edible fruits, roots, or small creatures. By afternoon, Ethan tinkered with the beacon and rummaged through the wreckage for any vital spare parts. Lyra honed her marksmanship, practicing with her bow on old logs or low-hanging fruit. By night, they took turns keeping watch. The sense of being observed grew stronger. Occasionally, Ethan spotted a flicker of movement on the fringes of his vision, shapes blending with the foliage. On one evening's watch, Lyra glimpsed a faint beam of light scanning the treetops in the distance. Each time they tried to investigate, they found nothing but rustling branches and disturbed undergrowth. Their tension escalated, but there was no direct confrontation, until one late afternoon, when they found themselves returning to the crash site after a foray for water. The scent of burnt plastic and scorched metal greeted them. The hull breach, which had once been stable, now showed signs of fresh tampering. One of the cargo bay doors stood wrenched open, and scattered footprints led around the wreck in uneven patterns. Heart pounding, Ethan pressed himself against the hull wall, motioning for Lyra to take the other side. With bow at the ready, she circled to the far entrance. The interior lay in shadow. A soft clatter of metal on metal drew Ethan's attention, and he stepped forward, spear raised. In the gloom, a figure crouched over the remains of the cargo hold. A tall, gaunt humanoid clad in patchwork armor. They rifled through crates and broken machinery with frantic greed. Behind them, a second figure hovered, clutching a handheld scanner. Neither wore insignia of any recognized authority. Their appearance suggested raiders, scavengers, or worse. Without warning, the second figure lifted his head and locked eyes with Ethan. A shout followed, and chaos erupted. The first intruder spun around, brandishing a stubby energy pistol. A single shot flared, scorching the hull near Ethan's face. He ducked behind a crate. "Stay down," Ethan yelled to Lyra, though he knew well she needed no such warning. She fired an arrow that whistled through the gloom, striking the raider's pistol hand with uncanny accuracy. The man cried out, dropping his weapon. The second intruder scrambled for cover, returning fire with a battered pulse rifle. Bolts of bright energy ricocheted through the cabin, kicking up sparks. Ethan flung a piece of metal debris at the rifleman, forcing him to jerk aside. Then Lyra sprang from behind a bulkhead, covering the distance with astonishing agility. Before the raider could bring his weapon to bear, she knocked it from his grasp and clubbed him in the temple with her bow, sending him sprawling. The first intruder, wounded and enraged, snatched up his fallen pistol with his other hand. He aimed blindly, panting in pain. Ethan lunged, driving his makeshift spear into the raider's side, deflecting the barrel. A shot rang out, burning a hole in the ceiling. The intruder gasped and fell to the floor, clutching his wound. Blood, human red, spread across the metal plating. Ethan's breath came in ragged gasps. Lyra hovered over the unconscious second intruder, bow raised, ready to finish him if necessary. But he was out cold. A wave of relief, tinged with nausea, passed through them both. "Pirates," said Lyra, her voice tight. It had to be pirates. Ethan knelt by the wounded man, forcibly disarming him. "You didn't give us much choice. Why are you here?" He tried to ignore the trembling in his own hands. The raider coughed, eyes wide with hatred. "Found your crash. Easy pickings. You won't get off this planet alive, you fools." He spat blood and gave a final, ragged breath, slumping into stillness. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. He'd never killed another man before, but survival had demanded it. He looked over at Lyra, who kept stoic watch, though sorrow flickered in her eyes. In Veridian culture, the hunt was sacred, but killing of a sentient being without honorable cause weighed heavily on them. The second raider groaned, stirring. Lyra wasted no time in binding his hands and feet with cable ties. Once certain he posed no immediate threat, they dragged him outside the wreck, propping him against the hull. "Who else is with you?" Lyra demanded, voice cold. The captive glared at them, pressing his lips tight. He wore a battered chest plate of dull silver, marked by a stylized skull, a sign of one of the many pirate outfits terrorizing the outer rim. "We found your beacon," he growled. "Thought we'd see if there's anything worth taking. Don't think you're better than us. This planet's a death trap anyway. So you came to loot us?" Ethan asked, heart pounding. "How many more of you are out there?" The raider let out a mocking laugh. "Captain Corda will come for me, and he'll skin you both alive." He sneered at them. "You should have run when you had the chance." Ethan and Lyra exchanged a concerned glance. One pirate ship was enough trouble. A captain and his crew spelled dire consequences. Lyra's lips flattened in grim resolve. "We cannot allow them to take us. We must be ready." They stripped the captive of his weapons, an energy knife, a cluster of grenades, and a small sidearm with a few remaining charges. Ethan silently marveled at how outclassed they were in terms of firepower. Yet the presence of the pirates also introduced a possibility. They had a ship. If the two castaways could somehow escape or hijack that vessel, they might return to the stars. The sun dipped below the horizon, turning the sky a kaleidoscope of purples and oranges, while the thick canopy enveloped them in deep shadow. They dragged the unconscious raider to the cargo hold, locking him in a makeshift cell formed from damaged crates. Night's creatures began their choir, and exhaustion wore at Ethan's mind. But there would be no peace that evening, for the threat of Captain Corda's wrath lay over them like a drawn blade. Their captive, a wiry man with a scar across his nose, identified himself grudgingly as Radok once he awoke the following morning. With the body of his fallen comrade removed from sight, Ethan and Lyra questioned him in tense whispers, hoping to unearth any clue about the pirate's location. At first, he was cagey, spitting insults and barbed taunts. But subtle intimidation from Lyra, whose hunting knife glinted in the early sunlight, loosened his tongue. "They'll come," he repeated, defiance flickering in his eyes. "Corda never leaves a man behind." "How large is your crew?" Ethan pressed. "A dozen. Maybe more," Radok said with a shrug. "We rove the outer rim, picking off sorry souls like you." Ethan and Lyra exchanged worried looks. A dozen armed pirates was no small threat. Even with Radok's stolen rifle and pistol, they were 2 against many. "There's a small plateau not far from here," Radok went on, a scornful grin splitting his face. "Pretty spot. We set up camp there. The jungle's too thick for our ship to land. Corda keeps it in low orbit, scanning the surface for movements." That revelation struck Ethan like a lightning bolt. "Then your ship is up there right now?" Radok sneered. "Yes, starry-eyed. But you won't get close to it without Corda's codes, and he'll kill you before you have a chance." Ethan's mind raced. If the pirate's craft was in orbit, then it could well intercept any distress signals from them. Or worse, the pirates might destroy any rescue that attempted to land. They needed another plan. "We'll keep watch for them," Lyra said, determination clear in her tone. "If they return, we must be ready. But if we can take them by surprise," she let the implication hang in the air. Radok barked a laugh. "You're outgunned, outnumbered, stranded. Your only hope is to run into the jungle and pray you don't get eaten." Lyra moved in a swift, predatory manner, pressing her blade lightly to his throat. "We are hunters. You are prey. Help us, or we leave you to this world's mercy." Radok gulped, his bravado dimming. "Fine," he spat. "Corda's men will come soon. At least 2 or 3 scouting parties. The rest remain at the plateau camp. Corda's got a portable comm station there. He checks in with the ship, coordinates orbital scans." Ethan glanced at Lyra. "If we destroy that comm station, we'd blind them," Lyra finished. "No way for them to call reinforcements from orbit." For a moment, a glimmer of hope stirred. The plan was reckless, but they had few options. Already battered by the environment, they now faced a foe of hardened criminals. Yet, just as they had survived the crash, so too could they endure this threat. "Then let's prepare," Ethan said. "We'll make the crash site look abandoned. Set traps. If the scouts arrive, we'll handle them. Once we have enough of their gear, we hit the plateau." Radok chuckled darkly. "Good luck. You'll need it." They spent the day in feverish effort, constructing rudimentary pitfalls around the perimeter of the clearing and rigging a tripwire attached to one of the pirates' grenades near the main entry path. Ethan recalibrated the stolen pulse rifle's power cells, hoping to eke out additional shots. Lyra carefully selected vantage points where she could snipe with her bow. And so, the trap was laid. If Corda's scouts came, they would be met with more resistance than they bargained for. Though Ethan's stomach twisted with anxiety, a steely resolve underlay his every move. Lyra, too, exuded a calm focus. She had faced monstrous beasts on her homeworld. These pirates, though cruel, bled and died like any other predator. By nightfall, the heat had relented somewhat, replaced by the thick humidity of the jungle. They doused every source of light, sitting in darkness, waiting. The captive Radok, still bound, glowered at them from a corner of the cargo bay, forced into silence by a cloth gag. A hush fell, broken only by the occasional cry of night creatures. Midnight. A faint rustling drifted from the tree-line. Lyra and Ethan exchanged looks. She pressed a finger to her lips, shifting into position behind an overturned crate near the hull breach. Ethan crept around the side, pulse rifle ready. A moment later, voices, low, tense, alien in the hush. Footsteps parted the leaves. Then, the flicker of a flashlight beam scanned the broken hull. The pirates had come. 2 pirates emerged from the undergrowth, silhouettes outlined by the faint starlight. Each carried weapons, one with a compact blaster, the other with a slug-thrower rifle. They edged closer, likely suspecting the place abandoned or easy pickings. A third figure, partially hidden behind them, carried a scanning device. "Anything?" came a hushed whisper. "Nah. The signal's still here, though. Maybe that worthless fool Radek bungled the job." Lyra inhaled slowly, steadying her pulse. She knocked an arrow, drew, and loosed in one fluid motion. The missile flew swift as a striking viper, embedding itself in the chest of the nearest pirate. He gasped, dropping in an instant. Ethan, for his part, fired a burst from the pulse rifle at the second intruder. The blasts tore through the darkness, sparking off the hull and striking the figure's leg. With a strangled cry, the pirate collapsed, returning fire blindly. Bolts seared past Ethan's head, sizzling the air. Chaos erupted as the third figure dove for cover, shouting a warning. Lyra shot again, the arrow slamming into the ground mere inches from her target. The pirate cursed, flailing to escape. Another shot from Ethan's rifle forced him into the tripwire zone. The hidden grenade detonated in a flash of blazing orange, sending flames and shrapnel tearing through the foliage. For an instant, the night lit as bright as day, accompanied by a thunderous boom. Ears ringing, Ethan pressed himself against the hull. Smoke and flickers of flame licked the clearing. One of the pirates lay still, half buried under fallen branches. The second, wounded by the initial arrow, tried to crawl away, only to collapse. The final intruder was nowhere in sight, presumably consumed in the blast. After ensuring no more pirates lurked at the edges, Ethan and Lyra approached the bodies. The stench of scorched fabric and blood hung heavy in the night air. Lyra's face was set in a grim mask, sadness flickering within her gaze despite the necessity of this violence. At the cargo bay's threshold, Radek stared wide-eyed, clearly unsettled by the savage efficiency of the ambush. Whatever illusions of an easy takeover he'd harbored had vanished. Ethan forced a calm he did not feel, addressing Radek in a low tone. "You see, we're not so helpless. Now tell us, when Corda learns his scouts are missing, how will he react?" Radek swallowed, gaze darting between the bodies. "He'll send another group, bigger this time," he muttered. "Unless you move fast, you'll be overrun." Lyra let out a soft exhale. "Then we must strike first." She glanced at Ethan. The plateau. Despite the adrenaline coursing through him, Ethan felt the weight of exhaustion. Still, what choice did they have? The pirates would come eventually. Better to hit them at a place of their choosing than wait to be cornered. They hurried to strip the corpses of weapons and ammunition. One of the pirates carried an advanced scanning device that Ethan recognized as a short-range motion tracker. Another possessed an older model plasma pistol with half a charge. Every bit of gear mattered. By the time dawn approached, they had decided. They would keep Radek bound but bring him along, using his knowledge of the plateau's location. Perhaps he could serve as a hostage if things went poorly. The risk of infiltration was high, but time was not their ally. As the first rays of morning light filtered through the canopy, the two survivors gathered their arms, secured their captive, and set out into the jungle. The hush of the dawn weighed on their shoulders, a quiet vow to face whatever doom awaited them among the pirates. Traveling through the dense jungle with a bound captive proved slow and exhausting. Dense, thorny vines caught at their clothing, and thick underbrush hampered every step. The planet's heat beat down upon them, and each breath seemed to sap their strength. Radek, cursing under his gag, stumbled frequently. With grim efficiency, Lyra prodded him onward. The new gear helped them avoid detection. The motion tracker beeped softly when large creatures or potential threats moved within a certain radius, allowing them to circumvent herds of massive, six-legged grazers and stealthy, cat-like predators that prowled the shadows. At midday, they paused near a broad river. Its waters churned with a milky hue, swirling around half-submerged logs. Lyra tested the current with a branch, frowning. "The flow is strong. We'd be swept away if we try to cross here." Ethan eyed Radek. "Is there another way?" The pirate shrugged sullenly. "Follow upstream. There's a narrowing under some cliffs. We sometimes cross there." Trusting that he spoke truthfully, if only to keep himself alive, they followed the riverbank, pushing through tangles of broad-leafed vegetation and creeping vines. A swarm of shimmering, dragonfly-like insects hummed around them. Lyra attempted to swat one away, only to discover its bite left a small welt that burned like acid. She cursed, her complexion darkening with pain. Ethan swiftly rummaged through the first aid kit and applied a soothing salve. Veridian huntswomen rarely need your remedies, but thank you, she said, a half-smile on her lips despite the sting. Ethan returned her smile, though worry gnawed at his thoughts. Each step deeper into the jungle made him feel more removed from the familiarity of starships and mechanical engineering. This world teemed with mysteries and dangers that no blueprint could prepare him for. Yet in Lyra's presence, he felt a strange sense of belonging, as though they were forging a bond far stronger than mere chance. After hours of slow progress, they found the narrower crossing Radok had mentioned. Large stones formed a series of stepping platforms in the rushing water. Carefully, they helped one another across, mindful of the raging current that threatened to drag them under. Radok almost slipped once, but Lyra seized his arm and hauled him upright. On the opposite bank, a winding path led up a sheer rock face. It was here, according to Radok, that the plateau lay hidden among tall ridges overlooking the jungle. The group climbed, hearts pounding with fatigue, aware that each step brought them closer to confrontation with Corda's men. At last, they reached a ledge that revealed a breathtaking vista. The river they had crossed meandered far below, shining like molten silver in the midday sun. The jungle stretched to the horizon, an endless expanse of emerald, dotted with ancient, towering trees whose canopies formed a patchwork tapestry. Beyond, jagged peaks scraped the sky. Yet it was not this grandeur that captured their attention. It was the faint column of smoke rising from a rocky plateau just ahead. Huddled amid large boulders and stunted trees was a makeshift encampment, the pirates' base of operations. Ethan and Lyra crouched behind a rocky outcrop. From their vantage, they saw several tents of synthetic fabric, supply crates, and a central comm antenna attached to a portable generator. A handful of pirates lounged or patrolled, each carrying a weapon. The entire camp was encircled by a ring of spiked barricades, presumably to ward off jungle predators. There, Radok muttered, nodding at a larger tent near the center. That's where Corda keeps the comm station. The generator's behind it. Ethan's mind raced with possible strategies. They had only a few weapons, some grenades, and the advantage of surprise. We need to disable that station, he whispered to Lyra. Even if we can't fight them all, we can at least destroy it. Lyra's eyes gleamed with determination. We must be swift and silent. If they see us coming, we'll be overwhelmed. Ethan nodded. Radok, you'll take us to the far side of the camp. If you try to betray us, I won't hesitate to leave you to the jungle. Radok smirked bitterly. Fine. At least if you die, I can slip away. They advanced slowly, circling the plateau. Thick brush and an overhang of rock helped conceal their approach. Once near the perimeter, Ethan used a pair of battered binoculars to survey the camp. He counted 9 pirates in sight. Another might be inside the tents, possibly the elusive Captain Corda. Lyra touched his shoulder lightly. We'll do this together, she said, reading the tension in his face. Ethan nodded, grateful for her steady presence. They had come so far, survived so much. One final push might decide their fate. Under the stifling sun, they waited until the pirates showed signs of routine distraction, some preparing a midday meal, others venturing to a nearby outcrop to keep watch. Then, with hearts pounding like war drums, they slipped inside the ring of barricades. Lyra took point, bow at the ready. Moving silently, she crept behind a guard leaning against a crate. One well-aimed arrow ended his vigil before he could cry out. Ethan, covering her, slipped between tents, scanning for any sign of detection. Radok trailed behind, his hands still bound loosely, eyes flicking nervously from side to side. A sudden shout disrupted the hush. A pirate emerged from a tent, catching sight of Lyra. He raised his blaster. Lyra dove behind a crate as plasma bolts scorched the air. Ethan returned fire with the pulse rifle, forcing the man to duck back inside. In an instant, the camp erupted into chaos. Pirates scrambled for cover, shouting alerts. One activated a mounted turret near the camp's edge, sending a volley of red beams across the open ground. Smoke and sparks cascaded in the scorching blasts. Ethan ducked, pressing his back against a crate. So much for stealth, he hissed. Lyra nodded grimly. We press on. The comm station is our priority. He hefted a stolen grenade. Cover me. Lyra popped up from behind the crate, firing arrows in rapid succession. Her uncanny aim kept the turret gunner pinned. Ethan sprinted across the gap, hurling the grenade toward the generator behind the central tent. A shrill whistle, then a thunderous explosion. Metal shards and fragments of smoking equipment sprayed into the air. Sparks rained down, and the tent collapsed in flames. For a moment, Ethan dared hope the station was destroyed. But as the smoke cleared, he glimpsed part of the comm antenna still standing, though leaning precariously. Sparks danced around the shattered generator, but the station's backup batteries might still function. Captain Corda could yet call his orbiting ship. Shouts and curses filled the air. Pirates rushed from every direction, their numbers greater than Ethan had hoped. Blaster fire streaked overhead. Lyra ducked as a pirate fired wildly, scorching the crate she hid behind. The Veridian Huntress replied with an arrow that pierced the attacker's side. The man dropped with a groan. Radok, seizing the moment of confusion, made a dash for the perimeter. A nearby pirate, presumably having recognized him, shouted, "Traitor!" A shot rang out, blasting the ground near Radok's feet. The captive howled, stumbling. Without hesitating, Ethan fired a covering volley, granting Radok a chance to scramble into cover beside a toppled tent. The irony of saving a pirate's life was not lost on Ethan, but desperation overruled any moral quandaries now. Suddenly, a towering figure emerged from the largest tent. He was built like a fortress, sporting a thick coat of battered armor and a heavy plasma cannon braced against his shoulder. A ragged black beard framed his harsh features, and a jagged scar cut across his nose. There was no doubt. This was Captain Corda. Corda's voice boomed through the tumult. "Who dares strike my camp?" He fired a bolt from the plasma cannon that exploded a nearby crate, sending Ethan sprawling. Dazed, Ethan tried to regain his footing, ears ringing. "You think you can rob me of my salvage?" Corda roared, scanning the chaos. His one good eye narrowed as he spotted Lyra, who was knocking another arrow. "You'll pay in blood." He unleashed another searing blast, forcing her to leap aside. The radiant heat singed her arm, leaving a painful burn. Then Corda's gaze fell upon Radok, crouched in the rubble of the collapsed tent. "You dare lead them here, you spineless dog?" He raised the cannon, fury twisting his features. Radok froze in terror, searching desperately for a weapon he lacked. Ethan, battered but resolute, aimed the pulse rifle at Corda. He squeezed the trigger. A barrage of energy bolts clanged off Corda's armor. The pirate stumbled, letting out an enraged snarl. A smaller pistol emerged from his belt, barking a volley of shots that forced Ethan to duck yet again. Lyra seized the distraction, rolling into cover behind the twisted remains of the comm station. She saw a half-buried explosive charge, likely part of the station's setup. If she could detonate it near Corda, it might bypass his armor. "Ethan," she shouted over the fray. "Draw him closer to the station." With no time for second-guessing, Ethan fired wildly in Corda's direction, taunting him. "Over here." The pirate captain growled, turning his attention to the engineer. "You'll regret that, whelp." Step by heavy step, he advanced, returning fire with lethal bursts. Sparks rained from the battered station, scattering in the crossfire. Lyra hastily armed the explosive charge, setting its short timer with trembling fingers. She signaled Ethan with a curt nod. Too late, Corda realized the trap. A flicker of alarm crossed his weathered features. He bellowed in rage, swinging the plasma cannon around for one final, devastating shot. But the charge detonated in a blinding flash. Fire and shrapnel enveloped the pirate captain, hurling him against the remains of the comm antenna. A bloom of smoke rose in the aftermath. For a moment, no one moved. The roar of the explosion still echoed in their ears. Then the wounded pirates, seeing their leader fallen, began to retreat. Some fled into the jungle. Others scrambled for any shuttle or hidden exit from the plateau. Ethan and Lyra, panting and half-deafened, surveyed the wreckage around them. The comm station was annihilated, twisted metal and sparking wires. Corda's body lay amid the debris, silent and still. Darkness seemed to cloud Ethan's vision as he sank to his knees, exhaustion overtaking him. Lyra stumbled forward, kneeling beside him. Her emerald skin bore bruises and scorched marks, but she managed a faint, victorious smile. It's done. The comm station is gone. In the distance, a battered Radek limped through the remains of the camp, arms still partially bound. He cast them a wary glance, torn between fear and grudging admiration. The pirates, or what remained of them, had been routed. Yet beyond the plateau, the jungle still stretched endlessly. Corda's orbiting ship lurked somewhere above, possibly with more pirates aboard. And the two survivors, alien Huntress and human engineer, had lost their best hope of contacting a friendly vessel by conventional means. The path ahead was uncertain, but for now, at least, they had lived to see another day. They spent the following hours tending their wounds and salvaging what they could from the pirates' camp. Tattered supplies, extra energy cells, a handful of medical items, slender spoils for such a brutal fight. A hush lay over the plateau, broken only by the low moans of a wounded pirate who had not escaped in time. Lyra, respecting the code of her people, spared him with a healing salve, leaving him with a warning to flee. The man, desperate to save his own life, limped away into the jungles. Radek lingered, uncertain. "You destroyed our comm station," he said bitterly. "Corda's ship will see no signal and likely jump to hyperspace eventually. You've stranded yourselves, and me, on this forsaken rock." Ethan sank onto a scorched metal crate. "We had no choice," he mumbled. "Better stranded than enslaved by your captain." The bound pirate scowled, but said nothing more. Lyra glanced at Ethan. "We've done what we must. Now we need to return to the Eclipse and regroup." Weariness hung over them like a heavy shroud. They descended from the plateau, carrying as many supplies as they could manage. This time, they followed a more direct route, guided by Radek's reluctant directions, cutting across the jungle in a forced march. Rain fell in a torrential downpour halfway through the day, turning the ground into thick mud. Light faded, replaced by the gloaming hush of nightfall. Yet they pressed on, unwilling to risk the jungle's nocturnal predators. They reached the crashed Eclipse by dawn of the next day. The sight of the battered ship offered a strange sense of relief. At least it was familiar. All around, the jungle bore signs of the previous battles, scorched patches where grenades had detonated, fallen trees from the crash. No sooner had they dropped their gear than a metallic scraping sound drew their attention. The battered hull's side door slid open, revealing a figure with striking features and bright, curious eyes. She wore a suit of greenish-black armor reminiscent of Veridian craft, emblazoned with an elegant sigil. Behind her stood two more figures of similar emerald skin, weapons at the ready. Lyra froze, astonishment washing over her features. "Veridians here?" The woman stepped forward, scanning Lyra's face. "We received your distress call. The signal was weak, but we traced it through the anomalies." Her gaze swept over Ethan, then Radek, and the battered remains of the camp in the distance. "We are a scouting party from Veridia, sent to investigate rumors of pirate activity and lost travelers. I am Commander Ciala." Lyra's eyes shone with relief, her voice trembling in gratitude. "Commander, I am Lyra, Huntress of the Veridian Plains. This man is Ethan Carlyle, a human engineer. Our ship crashed here, and we fought off pirates. We feared no help would come." Commander Ciala inclined her head. "Lyra, well met. We nearly did not detect your signal. This region is rife with interference." She glanced at Ethan. "We will do what we can to assist. Let us see if you are injured." Ethan barely mustered a smile, fatigue coursing through every muscle. "You have no idea how glad I am to see you." Behind them, Radek hung his head, shackles still in place. The Veridian soldiers appraised him coolly, awaiting orders. Commander Ciala gave a brief nod. "Pirate scum, I presume?" Ethan and Lyra exchanged glances. "He helped us, in a manner of speaking," said Ethan quietly. "Don't kill him." Radek shifted uncomfortably, but seemed relieved by the possibility of mercy. Ciala pursed her lips, then signaled for her men to take Radek into custody. "He will face justice for his crimes. But for now, let us see to your well-being. The flagship Aurora's light orbits nearby, ready to extract us once we clear the interference." A wave of profound relief washed over Ethan. They had beaten impossible odds, facing not just the savage jungle, but also the ruthless pirates. And now, at last, rescue had arrived in the form of Veridians with advanced technology and a starship. As the Veridian crew stabilized the wreck site, deploying advanced medical kits and scanning gear. Ethan could not help but marvel at the contrast of fates. Though battered and changed by hardship, he and Lyra remained united. The cosmic dice had fallen in their favor this time. A day later, Ethan and Lyra stood on the deck of the Aurora's Light, watching the jungle planet recede into space through a large viewing port. The rescue had been swift once the Veridians cleared the interference and signaled their flagship. A shuttle retrieved them and their meager belongings, leaving the battered Eclipse behind as unsalvageable wreckage. Radok and any surviving pirates were taken into custody, slated to face trial according to Veridian law. Ethan felt an odd mixture of pity and vindication for the man who had brought them so much trouble, and also, in the end, had inadvertently aided their escape. The ship's sleek corridors and softly lit panels provided a soothing contrast to the savage world they had left behind. Uniformed Veridians, most sharing Lyra's emerald complexion and regal bearing, moved with purpose and discipline. Their technology, brimming with organic and crystalline components, felt otherworldly to Ethan's mechanical sensibilities. They soon reached Veridia, a world of shimmering teal seas, lush forests, and gently sloping hills dotted with tall, spired structures. Lyra gazed upon her homeworld with a mix of joy and trepidation. She had been gone a long time, honing her hunting skills across distant stars. Now she returned with an unlikely companion, a human engineer who had fought by her side. The shuttle touched down on a platform overlooking a vast, tiered city built into the side of a mountain. Waterfalls cascaded from the heights, feeding crystalline pools and canals that wove through the streets. The architecture blended harmoniously with the environment, each building sporting living vines and blossoming flora. A gentle breeze stirred the air, perfumed by exotic blossoms. Ethan stepped onto Veridian soil, overwhelmed by the planet's splendor. The gravity felt slightly lighter than Earth's, lending a buoyancy to each step. Birds with iridescent plumage soared overhead, their calls echoing among the waterfalls. Lyra inhaled deeply, a faint smile gracing her face as she reconnected with the familiar sights and scents of her homeland. A small reception committee awaited them at the end of the landing platform. A group of Veridians dressed in ceremonial garb, their long robes embroidered with intricate patterns. At their center stood a tall figure with an ornate staff, the faint glow of a living crystal embedded at its top. Commander Ciala led Ethan and Lyra forward. Elders, I present Lyra, daughter of the Veridian Plains, and her companion Ethan Carlyle. They survived a crash and fought off pirates on a hostile world. The elder with the staff, whose name was Erelon, stepped forward and placed a hand over his heart, bowing slightly. Veridia welcomes you, daughter Lyra. And you, Ethan Carlyle of Earth. His gaze drifted to the bandages on Ethan's arms and the bruises on Lyra's face. You have endured much. We hope to offer you rest and healing. Lyra knelt, her head bowed. Honored elders, I am grateful to stand upon Veridian soil once more. She gestured to Ethan. This human saved my life many times. We stand as allies. Ethan attempted a polite bow, feeling self-conscious. Thank you for your hospitality. I owe Lyra my life as well. The elders nodded in approval. Then let us provide comfort and counsel, said Erelon. Come, we have prepared quarters for you both. They were led through winding paths of polished stone and living greenery, deeper into the city. Every step revealed a new marvel. Bioluminescent flowers that glowed softly in shaded alcoves, humming crystal sculptures that resonated with subtle musical tones, and waterfalls that flowed into mosaic pools. It was a far cry from the savage jungle or the battered corridors of the Eclipse. Yet for all its beauty, Ethan sensed a certain wariness from some Veridian bystanders. He caught curious stares, heard whispered remarks in a lilting language he did not fully understand. He was a human, an outsider, and though he stood under Lyra's protection, acceptance might not come easily. That evening, they settled in a guest house perched on a terrace overlooking the sprawling city. Warm, golden lights illuminated the interior, and servants offered trays of fruits and delicacies unfamiliar to Ethan's palate. Still reeling from their recent ordeals, both he and Lyra welcomed the respite. He felt a measure of guilt for enjoying such comfort when only days ago he had been fighting for his life amidst the jungle's deadly vines. Late in the night, when the city's lights shimmered like jewels below, Ethan joined Lyra on a balcony. The moons of Veridia, one greenish-blue, the other silver, cast dancing reflections on the waterfalls beneath. She leaned against the railing, gazing at the horizon. "Home," she murmured, her voice tinged with longing. "Yet I fear I have been away too long. My place here is uncertain." Ethan stood beside her. "They seem welcoming enough." She shook her head gently. "To our elders, I am a returning daughter. To the watchers in the streets, I am one who has mingled too freely with outsiders." She gave him a sidelong glance. "You, especially, will need to prove you are worthy of their trust." He exhaled slowly. "And how do I do that?" A faint smile curved her lips. "We will find a way. Veridians respect deeds above words. You've already shown your courage, but it may take time for them to understand." He nodded, a sense of calm settling in despite the uncertainty. The star-filled sky above Veridia reminded him of all they had endured and how far they had come. Stranded on a jungle world, hunted by pirates, and now standing on this beautiful planet. Fate had taken a strange turn, but for once, it felt like a hopeful one. The next morning, Elder Arelon summoned Ethan and Lyra to a gathering in the Hall of Blossoms, a grand chamber formed from sculpted trees and living vines. Veridian citizens gathered, whispering curiously. The elders sat in a semicircle, their robes shimmering in the dappled sunlight that filtered through a living canopy overhead. Lyra stood resolute, her posture regal despite her bandaged arm. Ethan, feeling out of place, attempted to mimic her composure. The elders began by inviting them to recount their story, how they had met, the crash, their battles, and how the Veridian scout ship found them. Lyra spoke passionately of Ethan's resourcefulness, praising his bravery. Ethan, for his part, humbly recounted how Lyra's skills and fortitude had saved them both numerous times. When they finished, murmurs rippled through the assembled Veridians. Some gazed at Ethan with newfound respect, others appeared wary, recalling tales of human expansion and the occasional friction with Veridia's sovereignty. Elder Arelon rose, staff glimmering faintly. "Lyra, daughter of Veridia, you have endured much hardship beyond our borders. You return with a human who saved your life, an honorable deed indeed. Yet we must consider what place this man might hold among us. Will he remain here, or seek his own path among the stars?" Ethan swallowed, unsure how to answer. Before he could speak, Lyra bowed her head. "Elders, I ask that you grant him sanctuary. In time, let him prove himself by contributing to our people in service or knowledge. I vouch for his character." A quiet hush followed, broken at last by an elder with stern features. "Our traditions are sacred, and we do not extend trust lightly. If this human is to remain, let him undergo the rite of symbiosis, that he may understand our bond with Veridia and prove his intentions are pure." Ethan cast a confused glance at Lyra, who pursed her lips thoughtfully. "The rite is an ancient practice," she explained softly. "A test to see if you can attune to Veridia's living heart." Arelon lifted his staff. "If he is found worthy, let him share in the bond of the green. If not, then perhaps his path lies elsewhere." Though uncertainty churned in his gut, Ethan thought of all he owed Lyra, of the bond they had forged through trials of blood and sweat. He bowed awkwardly but sincerely. "I accept. Tell me what I must do." The elders exchanged approving looks, and Arelon nodded. "So be it. The rite will commence at dawn in the Grove of Resonance. Rest well, travelers, for what lies ahead will test your spirit as much as your body." As Ethan followed Lyra out of the hall, he felt the stares of the Veridian people on his back. He wondered what manner of trial awaited him, and whether he could pass a test so deeply intertwined with an alien culture he barely understood. At dawn, a soft mist clung to the forest surrounding the Grove of Resonance. Towering trees curved overhead like cathedral arches, their leaves whispering in the gentle breeze. In the center of a grassy clearing stood an ancient stone structure, adorned with glowing green crystals sprouting from cracks in its surface. Elders gathered in a semicircle, their robes trailing on the mossy ground. Lyra, wearing a simple hunter's tunic, stood at the edge of the clearing, watching anxiously as Ethan approached. She gave him a small nod, silently conveying confidence. He tried to steady his racing heart, aware that success or failure in this ritual might shape his future, not just on Veridia, but in the fragile bond he shared with Lyra. Elder Arelon stepped forward, staff in hand. Ethan Carlyle, you stand on sacred ground. The rite of symbiosis requires you to align your spirit with that of Veridia's living essence. You must enter the circle of harmony and commune with the crystals. Let your intentions be pure, and open yourself to the planet's heartbeat. The other elders intoned in unison, their voices creating a subtle harmonic that resonated through the clearing. The crystals embedded in the stone circle began to glow more brightly, their light pulsing with a gentle rhythm. Ethan stepped into the circle, the stone cool beneath his feet. The swirling mist seemed to thicken, carrying the faint scent of blooming flowers. He closed his eyes, trying to calm his breathing, to find a center within himself. A deep, resonant hum filled his ears, as though the stones beneath him sang a quiet melody. At first, he sensed nothing but his own doubt and fatigue. Then, a flicker of warmth touched his consciousness, as if a distant chord had been plucked. Images swirled in his mind, glimpses of Veridia's lush forests, the swirling seas, the gentle slope of its mountains. He felt a presence, ancient and vast, as though the planet itself reached out to greet him. Memories of the hostile jungle world flooded his thoughts. The roars of predators, the relentless press of heat, the sting of pirate blasters. Those trials had shaped him, pushing him to the brink. Yet here, he found a warmth that soothed those wounds, that reminded him of the wonder he'd glimpsed in the green labyrinth of Veridia's own nature. A soft voice, half familiar, echoed in his mind. Will you nurture or destroy? It asked. Will you safeguard life or bring it harm? His chest felt tight. He recalled the moment he'd killed the pirate, the shock of taking another sentient being's life. But he also recalled the fight for survival, the need to protect Lyra, and how each day had tested his moral compass. His voice trembled, inaudible yet heartfelt. I want to protect, to grow. A surge of warmth answered him, coursing through his veins. The crystals flared in brilliant light. The hum rose in pitch, harmonizing with the beating of his heart. As tears gathered in his eyes, Ethan sensed a profound communion with the living force that the Veridians cherished. Then, as swiftly as it came, the sensation receded. The glow subsided, and he found himself kneeling on the stone floor, breath unsteady. Lyra rushed forward, worry etched on her face. Ethan, are you? He managed a shaky smile, wiping away tears he hadn't realized were falling. I think I'm all right. Elder Arelon stepped into the circle, staff lowered in a gesture of respect. The other elders murmured among themselves, eyes shining with approval. You have been found worthy, Arelon announced, voice carrying over the hush. The crystals have heard your spirit and accepted it. Veridia welcomes you as a friend. A collective sigh of relief coursed through the onlookers. Lyra clasped Ethan's hands, her emerald eyes brimming with pride. In that moment, any lingering reservations among the Veridians faded into acceptance. He was no longer just an outsider. He was a part of their living tapestry. Over the weeks that followed, Ethan settled into Veridian society, learning their customs, their language, and their way of life. He devoted time to the planet's mechanical needs, repairing solar collectors, refining water purification systems, and adapting Earth engineering techniques to Veridia's organic tech synergy. The Veridians, intrigued by his expertise, gradually shed their initial caution, welcoming him into their circles. Lyra reconnected with her old mentors, teaching younger huntresses the ways of the bow and the respect of the hunt. In her spare moments, she and Ethan explored the rolling hills and crystal-clear lakes, marveling at the peace they had not known for so long. Now and then, they thought of the lost Eclipse, lying in ruins on that hostile jungle world. They remembered the pirates, the desperation, and the unspoken bond that had drawn them closer through each ordeal. Under Veridia's gentle sun, those memories felt both distant and strangely precious, reminders of what they had overcome. One evening, they climbed a steep ridge near Lyra's childhood village, watching the twin moons rise. The air was crisp with a hint of floral perfume. A gentle hush lay over the land, broken only by the distant songs of night birds. I never imagined, Ethan said softly, eyes on the horizon, that I'd find a home so far from Earth. Lyra, standing beside him, laid a hand on his shoulder. Is it truly home? He turned to her, a grateful warmth filling his chest. It feels like it. Because you're here. Because your people gave me a chance. She offered a gentle smile, her emerald skin glowing under the moonlight. Then stay. We've both seen the darkness that lurks in the void. Let us build something better here. Ethan nodded, heart swelling with a quiet joy he'd rarely known. He reached for Lyra's hand, and she let him take it. Together, they watched the moons continue their slow dance across the sky. In the distance, the silhouette of a Veridian spire stood like a silent guardian. Perhaps one day, they would venture back into the stars, to share Veridia's compassion or to face new challenges. But for now, they savored the peace won at such a high cost. Far above, the starlit expanse of space shimmered with innumerable possibilities. But on this night, on this world where the forests sang in green symphony, Ethan Carlyle and Lyra of Veridia found a brief but precious harmony, one forged in adversity and sealed by hope. Time, as ever, carried them forward. Under the gentle guidance of Elder Erelon and the Veridian Council, Ethan contributed his engineering skills to a new starship design, one that blended organic technology and Terran ingenuity. Perhaps it would one day sail the cosmos, bridging the gap between worlds. Lyra continued honing her Huntress craft, mentoring new generations of Veridians eager to learn the delicate balance between warrior prowess and reverence for life. Tales of their survival on the jungle world, the defeat of Captain Corda's pirates, and the rite of symbiosis spread through the Veridian populace, growing into a quiet legend. The improbable partnership between an alien huntress and a human engineer became a symbol of unity in diversity. Children repeated the stories, wide-eyed, reminding one another that even in the darkest jungle, friendship could light the path. Far across the galaxy, rumors circulated of a battered pirate vessel forced to retreat, its captain lost in a fierce battle on a nameless world. Some said remnants of Corda's crew had sworn vengeance, while others whispered they had found better paths. Radek's fate remained a matter of some debate, but he was never seen on Veridia's shores again. As for Ethan and Lyra, life on Veridia did not promise eternal ease, but it offered something far more precious: belonging. Surrounded by shimmering seas and vibrant forests, guided by the living resonance of a planet that had welcomed him, Ethan Carlyle walked a road he could have scarcely imagined when he first boarded the Eclipse. And if the day came when a distress call beckoned them once more into the unknown, Ethan and Lyra would stand ready, side by side, an unbreakable bond forged in adversity and crowned by love's quiet triumph. On that final evening, as dusk painted the sky in swirls of gold and violet, they smiled at each other with unspoken certainty. They had survived a hostile world, overcome pirates' wrath, and found sanctuary in each other's trust. Whether sorrow or joy lay ahead, they would face it together, bound by the green heartbeat of Veridia that now pulsed in both their souls.